So again, you're lying on the floor, something you've done many times. What are you attending to? And what are you looking for? So you're gathering information. How are you starting to put it together in a way that's useful for you? And that's both about your learning process and your organisation. Maybe some of you can even think back to the last segment or the segment before or any time in the past and feel, what's different about my lying? Do I lie differently? What are the things that seem to stay the same? Are there things that have changed over the years? I'm sure there will be, definitely in what you're attending to, but is there overall a change in maybe the shape you make or the contact you make with the ground? Maybe it's in the rolling of your head, that something's changed over the years. Maybe it's in your breathing. And is there some relationship between all these things? The freedom to roll my head, my breathing, contact with the ground, the shape I'm making. The softness maybe in my attention, my ability to spread my attention. Or maybe it's something that you just feel more of you. It's easier as you lie there to just get this big snapshot of you. Your front and your back and your sides, internally, the space around you. So let's see what happens to some of those as we do this lesson. So bring your right leg to standing, feeling how you do it. Do that a few times. Let's go back to real basics. I know with Jeff that you would have done a lot on that intentionality, really trying to discover some of your habits. So really feeling as you go to lift your leg, are you already in a habit? Or that as you lift your leg, you're discovering more about your habit, maybe where you put effort in that's not necessary or stops something from moving. And could you bring your right leg to standing and leave it there? And then lengthen your left arm somewhere up above your head on the floor. And again, really feel, how do you do that? What's your process to set up the starting position for this lesson? So we're just simply organising the starting position, and we're feeling, how does you attending to finding the starting position, how's that going to influence you're learning. So your left leg's long, your left arm is long, so there's a long line on your left, your right leg is bent. And then you're going to start rolling your pelvis a little toward the left. So your question is, where could my right foot be that would facilitate this rolling of my pelvis to the left? And how does that movement go through me? So it's your pelvis that's rolling to the left. So you're thinking of initiating this movement from your pelvis. And what are you looking for? Because again, what you're looking for here in your ATM are the things you'd be looking for if you were doing this with someone in FI. If you had your hand on their pelvis in this position and you were feeling how they rolled their pelvis to the left. And the intention, if I give you a bigger picture, does that make a difference? That the intention as you roll your pelvis to the left is that you'd be looking to roll onto your left side. So don't do that. Don't roll onto your left side. But that's the bigger question you're asking. How would this movement of my pelvis to the left help me to roll onto my left side? What does your head do? And scan through. What does your left leg do? Your left shoulder? Your left arm? Does it get a little longer on the floor? Does your left leg get a little longer? Is there something about both of them getting a little longer as you begin to send this force through that would make it easier to roll onto your left side? And then could you begin to initiate, and again, I know you did a lot of this with Jeff last time, from your left hip joint. So is there a difference if you think of that spiraling of your left hip into your pelvis? Or maybe it's something about how this lifting of your hip and your rolling of the pelvis organizes your foot, your right foot, to take weight in a particular way. So where would your weight want to be going on your right foot to allow you to roll to your left? So this is what we're doing when we put our hands on someone, often in FI. We might be doing something just with their pelvis, feeling where does their shoulder go, but we're always thinking of the big picture. And the way we learn to do this is by doing this in our ATM practice. Paying attention to the quality. Okay. So you've gathered a fair bit of information. Could you do that on the other side now? And again, how do you get to that starting position? Are you already in your habit? To now bring your left leg up and your right arm long. So what's your timing? How quickly do you go toward a big movement? And remember, well, you mightn't have noticed, but some of those bigger questions that we ask when we're looking for more information, we often need to slow down a little bit more. Not to stop it, but to slow it down so our attention's got time to keep moving. So that we find that the way we move our attention doesn't stop us, doesn't get us stuck. It was interesting. Some of you might know that a friend's writing this book on some of the things I talk about, and we've been sort of trying to find a title, and one of them we really loved was Getting Unstuck. How do we get stuck in our attention? And you're comparing the two sides. And again, is there a difference if you think of initiating the movement from your pelvis? Or if you include that image of your left hip joint, does that somehow wake up something different on the diagonal? If your hip joint and that rotation in your hip joint is part of the image, does it take your head somewhere different if you just roll your pelvis or if you include that spiraling of your hip joint? Where could your head go? What happens in both shoulders? What are the bits you've got in your image or you're leaving out of your image? In your toes, in your collarbones, both knees, all the bones in your feet. Do your eyes stay soft? Are your ears in your image? The back of your head. And we're always looking for sort of this distribution of effort. So how does this force go through me? Does something start moving? Because we're really clearly starting this from your hip and your pelvis. So does your head start moving before the movement's got there? What are the parts of you that you know how to move that like to take up the movement? Have a rest. Okay. So I've deliberately started this lesson in a way that we've got a movement that you need to involve more of yourself in the image. Gives you an opportunity. We're doing a little bit of, if you like, force transmission, how you move across the ground, how you use the ground. Finding if we just take it slow for a start, what that enables you to pay attention to. So come back to the first side with your right leg bent, left arm long. Again, how did you transfer what you learned in those first movements? Did you consider them as you did that? And this time, as you begin that same movement of lifting, rolling your pelvis to the left, feeling that spiraling movement of your left hip, begin to sense that both your left arm and your left leg get a little longer. And that your right shoulder could begin to move away from the floor to bring you more fully onto your left side. So what's happening in your middle? We're really feeling this diagonal between your right hip, your right leg, going through to that reaching left arm, and you're finding a way that your whole left side begins to lengthen. So you begin to roll more and more onto your left side. So where does your right shoulder have to go? What does it need to do? What does your left hip need to do? Where does your head go? Is there a point somehow, somewhere where your head begins to lighten on the floor, that there's something happening through the middle of you? And I don't mean that it has to lift, don't make it lift, but that there's something happening through you that's allowing your head to lighten, to be carried along. So you could even now begin to feel that your right shoulder and your right hip begin to both move at the same time. So as soon as your right hip starts to lift, your right shoulder could begin to lift as well. Or it's going to do something. What's happening in the relationship of your ribs and your sternum, and of that wonderful area between your shoulder blades, at the base of your neck and coming round through the first rib. How's that getting ready to mobilize? And then when you're ready, you can explore that same thing on the other side. Take a rest if you want to feel the difference. Take a pause. This is not a lesson that Feldenkrais spends a lot of time on feeling difference. He gives you a rest. But most of it's in the actual process of the movement. So this rolling of your pelvis to the right, now with the spiraling of your left hip, of how your left foot organizes, to get the movement from your hip through to your sacrum, through to your pelvis, through to your sacrum, through your lower back, your spine, your ribs, your sternum, your first rib. What are the bits that you leave out? How do you find a way to organize your middle through this ability to support yourself on the ground, to roll across the ground, but let your head get light? Because as I said, these are the questions we're asking when we put our hands on someone. So all of you have a really individual way of doing this, of how you thread this movement through. Have a rest again. So we've really been looking at how we get longer on one side and shorter on the other. How the movement of your pelvis, your hip and your leg can help to propel that turning, if you like, that rolling. The rolling on to one side, lengthening. So now lie on your belly. Your legs spread a bit, your arms long and spread above your head. Your head wherever it's comfortable at the moment for you. And really notice, is that in the midline that you're comfortable? Is it with your head to one side? And what are you noticing about your shape? How do you sense yourself on your belly? Your breathing? So now in this position, again, wherever your head is at the moment's great. And begin to lift now your right hip a little bit away from the ground. So definitely your hip. So you're thinking of maybe someone's coming under your pelvis into your groin where the hip joint is, and their fingers are very gently beginning to just lift your hip to start your pelvis rolling to your left. And could you feel as you do this that your right knee could begin to bend a little bit in response to this? So again, you might have to play around with where your legs are, how wide they are. But the thing I really want you to play around with here is the position of your head. So some of you have got it turned Some of you have got it straight down, and some of you are, a lot of you, so you've got turning, but some of you are translated as well. So your head's positioned more to the left and right. So really play around. Let's do turning first. So you might want to start with your head in the middle, or your right ear more on the floor, or your left ear more on the floor, and see how does that influence my ability to lift my right hip, to feel that my knee would start to bend. And I could maybe feel that my left arm, again, and left leg could begin to lengthen a little bit. So we're still interested in this same pattern of the side we're rolling to getting a little bit longer. So how does where your head is, your habitual position of your head, influence this? How does that influence what can happen through your chest, through your shoulders? So you've got your turning of your head, and you've also got the translation of your head. So you might want to feel, is it influenced by, if I've got my head turned to the right, does it make a difference if my head is more to the right, if I pick it up and put it more to the right, or if I pick it up and put it more to the left? Does that translation position of my head influence this ability for my right hip to lift, to begin to pull up to the side a little, and this movement to go through so that my whole left side begins to get longer? So how does this spiraling, because your hip still has to spiral. Can you feel that? Even as if it's lifting, it's not a straight lift. There's something rotating and turning. And how does the rest of you enable this to happen? So you could begin to feel that your right knee begins to bend a little bit. Don't make it happen. You're feeling your way to see how could this happen. Your right elbow could begin to bend a little. And where might that take your head? So your elbow stays on the floor, your knee stays on the floor. And you're finding a way of getting longer on your right as you feel, longer on your left as you feel your right side gets a little smaller. And don't get too seduced. Some of you, I can see, are in your heads because you're getting seduced by, I have to take my head onto my left arm. Feel your way. Where does your head have to go to allow you to roll onto your left side? Because again, we'll often have this idea about where it should go, which is great. But then we need to go, but is that where it would go? If I just stay with this bigger picture of I'm trying to get longer on my left and shorter on my right, is there a particular way my head might go that would lighten it. Okay. Try the same thing lifting your left hip. Again, if you want to pause, take pauses as you want. And feel you can compare left and right. And when you get stuck, what do you do when you feel something, I just feel I can't go any further? Is it something in your head position, your shoulders, your breathing? Maybe you could even begin to alternate a little. Once lifting your right hip. That's another really big learning help for us. To do a little bit one side. What do I do? And again, what's really important in this process is this is what FI is about. It's exactly the same thing. I'm doing something with someone and it's not going through. Something's not clear. Where could I spread my attention to in them? That could make this movement, that they really feel that they're doing just as much in their shoulders as their hips. We're really distributing the effort, distributing the movement, finding a lightness, ease. And let's see if we can just give one more clue to some of you. Some of you love extending. I can relate. So really notice as you begin to lift your hip, what does your low back do? Where does your pelvis go? Do you arch your back? Or could this be something about maybe engaging your flexors a little bit more to roll onto your back? So where's your head going to go if you're not arching your back? Have a rest on your back. And this is where, you know, in our own ATM practice, often it's really hard to know what we're doing. That's why FI is so valuable, because you get someone else's eyes on you. So really feel free as these lessons continue over the next 3 weeks, just now and then, just go, I might just have a look what other people are doing. I'm feeling a bit stuck. Maybe that'll help me, just inform me a little about, is there other ways I could do this? Or maybe often when we're observing someone, our attention, we can pick something out that we never look at on ourselves. And just see, how are you contacting the ground at the moment? How's your breathing? What's it like rolling your head? What's changed? And if something's changed, do you know what's changed in your self-image? Is it something in your attitude? So again, always looking for these relationships. What happens in freedom of my head, my breathing, my contact with the ground, the shape I'm making. Do you feel your arms and legs and your head in slightly different places from when you started? When we explore these sort of diagonal movements and then begin to move through space. So find a way now to slowly come to having both legs above your chest. Go slowly. Feel your way. Is it a little easier for some of you not to have to engage your low back as much now when you bring your legs to your chest? That they could rest somewhere comfortably. And where are they? Are your knees close together? Are they wide apart? And just play around with them a little bit there. What happens if your knees are closer together? How does that influence the width in your back, the length of you? What happens if your knees are wide apart? So how do you find a position for your legs above your chest that gives you easy breathing, easy contact with the ground? And then could you have your arms above your chest as well? So your elbows are pointing at your knees and your knees are pointing at your elbows. And just notice, do I generally have my elbows wider than my knees or closer than my knees? Is there something different about where I get width in the top and bottom of myself? And then in this position, feeling your contact with the ground, this support on the ground, could you begin to take your left elbow and your left knee a little bit closer together? And feel, what do you do with your right elbow and your right knee to do that? So if your left elbow and left knee come together, no, your hands aren't holding your head. Your arms are resting above your chest. No? Head's just resting on the ground at the moment. And feel the difference if, as you take your left elbow and left knee, do you take your knee to your elbow or to your thigh? Is there a difference if you really think about the points of where your left elbow and knee are? And begin to see if in doing this, and then you can take your right elbow and knee toward each other in a way, can you again get some sense of what we've been doing in the previous movements? You're sort of getting a little longer on one side, shorter on the other. And every part of you is responding to this movement. And the pleasure that you can get in the movement once you include that everything can move. Everything's responding. And then feel the difference if you take one side together and apart and you don't allow the other side to move. What's happening in your self-image? Because this is what happens in language. You know, we say to people, do this one thing, and you can see that they immediately just put all their attention on the one thing. And if it's a new movement, that's what we'd expect. But how do we use our voice? How do we spread their attention so that they're gradually getting this idea of more and more of them in their image? Okay. So now could you begin to move your right elbow and your right knee away from each other? Your right elbow and your right knee away from each other. And as you do this, you're going to begin to roll to your right. So your right elbow and right knee, so your right arm and right leg begin to straighten a little bit. So it's not just that your arm and leg are staying in the same configuration, but there's something about the elbow and knee moving away from each other that's asking you to lengthen them. So that you roll. Intention now is to roll to your side so that again you're going to be long on your right side. And where does your head need to go to make this easy? Is there a point where your head needs to lighten and lift a little bit away from the floor? And where would it go to help this lengthening and shortening? Would it turn? Would it side bend? What would make sense? Where would your head go that is going to be influenced by what you're doing in your upper back and your shoulders? And if your head feels really heavy, it really doesn't know what to do, start with your head lifted a little bit away from the floor. You can support it with your left hand if you want to. So your arm and leg are getting longer, 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 longer. Your breath is soft. Go, 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 go. Go on. Now go. There. Yeah. So can you begin to feel your head is going to lift and your head can't keep rolling forward to make this easy. It's going to lift so that your left ear is going to come a little bit closer to your left shoulder. And it's this lifting of your head that's going to stop you falling onto your side. So that maybe some of you can begin to feel that you could roll all the way to your belly. Go slow. So feel if you clunk to the side, most of that is because your head isn't connected into your torso. So this importance of our head being light, lifted from our torso, this is what a baby's learning incredibly early on. And then once you get to your belly, go back the same way. So you're going to initiate going back by lifting your left hip. So you get on your belly and everything's long. And then you lift your left hip again. Sorry, yeah. Oh, I think you're all rolling different directions. Hang on, please all go the same way. So we're going to we're rolling, we're lengthening through your left side. So I might have confused you. Yeah, and you're lifting your left hip to go back to your back. Huh? And feeling, how do I get my head light? What is it that these movements are beginning me to allow to mobilize through my middle? And my middle can mobilize like this when my limbs are lighter, so that there's not all these big muscles doing the work. So I come back onto my back and I'm with my legs and arms above my chest again. It's still this lovely sequence of one side getting longer as the other side gets shorter, that's lifting your head. It's that lifts your head. This ability of your right side to get long. And feel if you keep your head lifted, once you've found the lightness in your head, if you keep it lifted, if you keep that little bit of tonicity, not work, but tonicity in your head, feel when you get to your belly, your arms and legs could both be in the air. And you'd be resting along the length of your belly with your arms and legs in the air and your head up off the floor. But you see if you can feel, if you don't find the lightness in your head, that's a very difficult place to get to. So there's these relationships, these organizational ideas about how do I get my head light? And next time you're on your back, have a rest. So all of these movements of being able to translate our head left and right, of being able to turn our head, to move it in a circle through space, they're all predicated on us understanding this lightness in our limbs, this ability to change the shape in our torso, to give up, for many of us, our habits of perception. And what do I mean by that? Our habits of how we use our eyes, of how we orient with our ears, of finding all these different places my head can be in space, so that I'm not reliant on my teleceptors, my eyes, my ears, to tell me where I am in space. Because I've got all these other things feeding in, all the contact with the ground and where my arms and legs are and my breathing. That can give me that sense of support and ease that allow my head to become free. Okay, so when you're ready, try the same thing to the other side. Make sure you've cleared a space for you to roll to. Some of you have got lots of stuff on the floor, so make sure you've Giving yourself room. So now you're beginning to take your left knee and your left elbow away from each other. And that's the instruction. But how do you keep that bigger picture of the left knee and elbow moving away? So I'm getting longer through my left side. And that I'm really feeling this asymmetry of my arms and legs, that they don't have to work together. One's bending as one's straightening. This is a huge thing for a baby to learn, this ability to dissociate, if you like, its arms and legs. So that everything's always moving. To allow your head to get light. That you keep rolling across the ground. There's always somewhere for you to keep rolling. And to really notice that as you keep going, your pelvis never stops moving. Because your legs are light, your breathing's easy, so there's nothing to stop your pelvis from moving. And to really begin to feel that as you find that lightness through your torso, the ability to shift your weight, to soften your ribs, soften your intention, that your head just lifts so easily that you come onto your belly and both arms and legs are in the air. They're not resting on the floor, but they're in the air. And the thing is, not can you do that, but what's your inquiry about what's necessary? This is where the teacher bit comes in. What do I have to understand that gets someone's head light? So you always come back by now, lifting your right hip. So we're sort of still really initiating from your hip and pelvis to give you the power. And feeling how does everything follow that? One arm and leg getting long, and then the other come to join it. And then one arm and leg comes together, and then the other in a sequence because of how I'm rolling my weight, shifting. The other one starts to bend to come onto my back again. Have a rest on your back. Just a small lesson. But again, what's happened to how you feel, how you sense yourself now about after having to organize your attention, to organize that I've still got all of these parts, but I've got this softly moving attention and intention that is going to help me to move through space. So how do I find this ability that I can keep this moving attention, this soft intention, whether I'm doing something quite dynamic or whether I'm going really slow as we did in those first few movements where there's plenty of time to pay attention. Okay, everyone, arms and legs above your chest again. Just see, is that getting any easier? Are your limbs getting lighter from doing all this rolling? And lift your head a little bit. Is your head feeling a little lighter? So let's start a little bit this time with your head lifted. And everyone is going to roll together to the right. So you've got to be now aware of all the people around you. Have you got room to roll? So you're all doing it together. So, or one line could at least do it together. And you go to your belly and then you go back. You get back again. So now we've got another level of complexity here. Not only do you have to pay to yourself, pay attention to your internal self, to all these things you're doing, how you're moving through space, but you have to have enough attention left to be paying attention to what everyone else is doing as well. So how do we keep building this ability to have multiple levels of attention? And it's not about whether you can do it or not, but just these give you the opportunity to go, this gets too much to pay attention to. What have I done that all of this gets too much? Is it that I hold my breath? Do I tighten in my upper back? Does my neck get stiff? What do I do when it all gets a bit much? Because there's your habit. So one knee and elbow are always coming toward each other or going apart. Okay, what about if you go the other way? Is it easier one way than the other to do this, to pay attention? And has that got something to do with how you use your eyes, which eye you like to use? Can your head go as easily? Does it get as light this way? Okay, and then for those who are sort of still going, keep rolling to the right. Just keep going. Oh, so to your left. Sorry. So your left elbow and knee are moving away from each other, your heads, and you go to your belly, and then now you're going to lift your left hip. Then come and on your back, your arms and legs are above each other. And feel it's this ability for your for your elbows and knees to come really close together and then to fully move apart that tells you what you can do in your torso. So really notice when you get to your back, are your elbows and knees a long way away from each other? So feel free. You could keep your head lifted the whole time as you do this. It never has to touch the ground. Whoa! She did. That's okay, Anna. You just got a bit disoriented. Okay, leave it, come up to standing. And what's it like to come up to standing? How free is your pelvis to move at the moment? For your head not to maybe get stuck or to be able to keep moving through space. So what's this lesson evoked in your walking? How spread is your attention between yourself and the world around you and the people around you? and we'll take a break.